I'm Haley, 24, and I'm sitting in my old Honda Civic, which has been my home for the past 8 months. I just finished a double shift, waitressing all day and then straight to the convenience store until 2 a.m. My bedroom consists of a worn blanket, a small pillow, and whatever belongings fit in the back seat. I escaped my stepfamily's house with almost nothing, building a life between 2 jobs and 4 wheels. My phone rings, an unknown number. I hesitate before answering. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to hear how my life completely changed when I answered that call. Growing up, I had what most would consider a normal, happy childhood. We lived in a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburb of Portland. My dad worked as an electrical engineer, and my mom taught second grade at the local elementary school. Weekends meant bike rides through the neighborhood, homemade pancakes on Sunday mornings, and movie nights with popcorn battles and pillow forts. I was their only child, which meant I got all their attention, something I never realized was so precious until it was gone. Everything changed when I turned 12. Dad was driving home from a business trip when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed the median. He died instantly. At least that's what the police officers told us when they showed up at our door. Mom collapsed when she heard the news. I just stood there, frozen, unable to process what they were saying. How could Dad be gone? He had promised to help me with my science fair project that weekend. The following months were a blur of funeral arrangements, relatives bringing casseroles, and Mom crying herself to sleep every night. I'd lie awake listening to her sobs through the wall, feeling helpless. I started taking on more responsibilities, doing laundry, making simple meals, even paying bills online with Mom's supervision. I grew up fast, but I didn't mind. I just wanted to make things easier for her. About 18 months after Dad died, Mom started seeing Kent. She met him at a grief support group. His wife had died of breast cancer a few years earlier. The first time she invited him over for dinner, I was cautiously optimistic. Mom was smiling again, something that had become rare, and her eyes had a spark I hadn't seen since before Dad's accident. Kent was tall with salt and pepper hair and a booming laugh that filled our too-quiet house. He brought Mom flowers and actually seemed interested when I talked about school. He had 2 teenagers of his own, Ryan, who was 17, and Melissa, 15. They seemed nice enough during our first few blended family outings, if a bit reserved. "They're just adjusting," Kent would say, putting his arm around Mom. This is new for everyone. Mom glowed when Kent was around. She started doing her hair again, buying new clothes, making plans for the future. After seeing her lost in grief for so long, I was willing to accept almost anything that brought her back to life. They got married when I was 14, just over 2 years after Dad died. The ceremony was small, just family and close friends in our backyard. Mom wore a simple cream dress, and I was her maid of honor. I remember feeling both happy and hollow that day, like I was betraying Dad somehow by standing there smiling as Mom promised herself to someone else. After the honeymoon, Kent and his kids moved into our house. That's when things started to change, in ways so subtle I barely noticed at first. Ryan claimed the bigger bedroom, the one next to mine that we'd been using as a study. Melissa took over the bathroom we shared, her makeup and hair products leaving no space for my things. Small comments were made about how the house had been let go since Dad died, despite Mom and me working hard to maintain it. Kent was different when Mom wasn't around. The warm smiles disappeared, replaced by curt instructions or just being completely ignored. Once, when I asked if he'd seen my math textbook, he looked at me like I was speaking another language and walked away mid-sentence. At dinner, conversations revolved around Ryan's football games or Melissa's dance competitions. When I tried to share news about making honor roll, Kent would nod absently before turning the conversation back to his kids. Mom noticed sometimes and would try to redirect. Haley was telling us about her science project, honey, but even she gradually stopped doing that. I tried to maintain a positive outlook. "We're still adjusting," I told myself, echoing Kent's words. This is new for everyone. I focused on school, throwing myself into academics and a few close friendships. Home became a place I merely existed in, But I told myself it was temporary. College would be my escape. Dad had started a college fund for me when I was born, and Mom had continued adding to it even after he died, despite our tighter finances. Then one evening, when I was 16, I overheard Kent and Mom talking about finances. "It's just sitting there," Kent was saying. "I could triple it with this investment opportunity." "But that's Haley's college fund," Mom replied, her voice uncertain. "And it still will be," Kent assured her. "Just bigger. Don't you want her to have the best education possible? This is temporary. 6 months, a year tops." A week later, Mom told me they'd be borrowing from my college fund for a while, but not to worry because it would all be back with interest before I graduated. I nodded and smiled, ignoring the knot forming in my stomach. Despite the increasingly tense home situation, I maintained straight A's through sophomore and junior year. I joined the debate team and the science club, padding my resume for college applications. Harvard was probably out of reach financially, but I had my sights set on several state schools with good pre-med programs. Mom had always said I'd make a wonderful doctor with my combination of intelligence and empathy. I remember sitting in my room one night, junior year, scrolling through university websites, planning my escape. I'd been accepted to a summer program for high school students interested in medicine. The old Mom would have been ecstatic, but the current version just nodded tiredly when I told her, then went back to whatever Kent was saying. Still, I held on to hope. Things would get better. They had to. The summer before my senior year, Mom started feeling tired all the time. At first, we attributed it to stress and her increased workload. She'd taken on extra tutoring hours to help with household expenses. But when she found a lump in her breast during a shower, our world shattered again. The diagnosis came back quickly: stage 3 breast cancer. Aggressive. The doctors recommended immediate treatment, surgery followed by intensive chemotherapy and radiation. Mom put on a brave face, saying, "I've fought bigger battles than this," but I could see the fear behind her smile. With Mom's diagnosis, our family dynamics shifted dramatically. You'd think a crisis would bring people together, but it only exposed the fault lines that had been forming since Kent moved in. While I rearranged my schedule to drive Mom to appointments and manage her medications, Kent was conspicuously absent, always citing work commitments or Ryan's football games. "Your mother needs her rest," became Kent's excuse to exclude me from family dinners or weekend outings. I'd come home from school to find them gone, a hastily scribbled note about pizza money on the counter. Meanwhile, I was the one holding Mom's hair back when she vomited after chemo, the one researching clinical trials late into the night while everyone else slept. As Mom grew weaker, Kent's true nature emerged from behind the charming facade he'd maintained. One evening, when I asked if he could pick up Mom's prescription since I had a major exam to study for, he exploded. "Do you think I don't have responsibilities? I'm keeping this family afloat while you just focus on your precious grades. Some of us live in the real world, Haley." Mom was asleep during these outbursts, and when I tried to tell her about them, she'd look at me with tired eyes and say, "He's under a lot of pressure, sweetie." We all are. Meanwhile, my step-siblings became increasingly hostile. Melissa started spreading rumors at school that I was exaggerating Mom's condition for attention and special treatment from teachers. Ryan accidentally deleted a term paper from our shared computer, costing me a night of sleep to rewrite it. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "Maybe you should learn to back up your files. College is going to eat you alive." My friends gradually drifted away. Between caregiving duties and schoolwork, I rarely had time for social activities. When I did make plans, they'd often be derailed by an urgent call from Mom or a deliberately scheduled family obligation that Ken insisted I couldn't miss. The few friends who persisted in reaching out eventually stopped when their invitations were repeatedly declined. The school counselor wasn't much help either. When I finally worked up the courage to talk about what was happening at home, she nodded sympathetically and said, "Blended families can be challenging, especially during a health crisis. Everyone copes differently with stress." She gave me a pamphlet about grief counseling and suggested I try to see things from their perspective. My 18th birthday came and went with barely an acknowledgement. Mom managed to give me a card she'd asked a nurse to buy, her handwriting shaky but heartfelt. Kent and my step-siblings were supposedly planning a dinner that never materialized. They went to one of Ryan's games instead, leaving me alone with Mom, who fell asleep early from her medication. Through it all, I maintained my grades somehow. I applied to colleges, though the applications felt increasingly like exercises in futility. Kent had never mentioned returning the money he'd borrowed from my college fund, and whenever I tried to bring it up, he'd deflect or get angry. By spring of my senior year, Mom's condition had deteriorated significantly. The cancer had spread to her lungs and brain despite aggressive treatment. I started skipping classes to be with her, catching up on schoolwork during the quiet hours when she slept. Teachers made exceptions for me, sending assignments home and allowing me to take tests when I could come in. 2 weeks after my high school graduation, a ceremony Mom was too ill to attend. She slipped into a coma. 3 days later, she was gone. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand as she took her final breath, while Kent and my step-siblings waited in the hall, already discussing funeral arrangements in hushed tones. The funeral was surreal. Kent played the part of the devastated husband perfectly, accepting condolences with a stoic nod and a firm handshake. Ryan and Melissa stood solemnly at his side, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes. Meanwhile, I felt like I was drowning, barely able to breathe through the crushing weight of my grief. Teachers, neighbors, and Mom's colleagues approached me with kind words and memories, many mentioning how proud she'd been of my acceptance to the state university's pre-med program. I nodded and thanked them mechanically, not having the heart to tell them that my college plans had evaporated. A week after the funeral, I learned the truth about my college fund. It wasn't just temporarily borrowed, it was gone. When I confronted Kent, he shrugged and said the investment hadn't panned out. "These things happen," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Your mother understood the risks." Looking at him then, I realized with sickening clarity that there had probably never been any investment. My education fund, the one Dad had started and Mom had faithfully contributed to even during the leanest times, had simply been absorbed into Kent's lifestyle. The day after Mom's funeral, it was like a switch flipped in our household. Kent no longer maintained even a pretense of treating me like family. He cleared out Mom's closet before I had a chance to go through her things, donating most items to Goodwill despite my protests. When I rescued a few of her sweaters from the donation bags, he rolled his eyes and muttered something about unhealthy attachments. The reading of Mom's will brought another shock. She had updated it after marrying Kent, leaving the house to him and a small life insurance policy to me. The policy would have covered most of my first year of college tuition, but nothing beyond that. Kent waited less than a week before approaching me about the insurance money. "We need to discuss your contribution to the household," he said one evening, Ryan and Melissa flanking him like bodyguards. "Now that you're an adult, you should be paying your share." "My share?" I repeated, confused. "Rent, utilities, food," he listed off, ticking his fingers. "You're not a child anymore, Haley. That insurance money should go toward family expenses." When I refused, saying Mom intended it for my education, the atmosphere in the house grew even more hostile. Suddenly, I was treated like an unwelcome tenant rather than family. Kent installed a lock on the refrigerator, claiming food was disappearing too quickly. The Wi-Fi password changed daily, with Ryan or Melissa forgetting to tell me the new one until after I'd completed whatever household chores had been assigned to me. My belongings started disappearing. First small items like jewelry that had belonged to Mom, then my laptop charger, eventually even clothes. When confronted, everyone denied knowledge with exaggerated innocence. "Maybe you're just disorganized," Melissa suggested with mock concern. "Mom always said you had your head in the clouds." Mom had never said any such thing, but there was no one left to defend me against these fabricated memories. I enrolled in community college, planning to complete general education requirements while working part-time to save for university transfer. The first semester started well enough. I had a schedule that allowed me to work evenings at a local restaurant and still make my morning classes. Then my textbooks vanished from my room the week before midterms. My flash drive with all my assignments was accidentally formatted by Ryan, who claimed he thought it was his. The electricity to my bedroom was frequently having issues during study periods, though it worked fine in the rest of the house. The gaslighting was constant and coordinated. If I confronted them, they'd exchange concerned glances and suggest I might need professional help to deal with my grief. Kent even went so far as to call my community college counselor, expressing worry about my increasingly paranoid behavior and difficulty adjusting to adult responsibilities. Money I kept hidden in my room disappeared, even after I changed hiding spots multiple times. My car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic that had been Mom's, mysteriously developed issues whenever I had important classes or work shifts. I'd find the battery dead or tires suspiciously low on air. One particularly cold January evening, I came home from a late shift to find the heat in my bedroom turned off while the rest of the house was warm. When I went to adjust the thermostat, Kent intercepted me. "Energy costs are through the roof," he said flatly. "If you want heat, you need to contribute more." I was already giving him half my waitressing salary for room and board, leaving me barely enough to cover gas, car insurance, and my community college textbooks. The insurance money remained untouched in my account, the one thing I refused to surrender. My grades began to slip as the sabotage intensified. I couldn't keep up with replaced assignments and missed study sessions. After my psychology professor pulled me aside to express concern about my falling asleep in class, after a night where Ryan had friends over, blasting music outside my door until 3 a.m., I realized something had to change. The breaking point came during finals week of my second semester. I returned from my waitressing shift to find my room had been cleaned, meaning most of my remaining possessions were gone, including my backpack containing all my notes and study materials. Kent claimed they donated items that cluttered the hallway to a spring cleaning drive, though my things had all been neatly contained in my room. That night, I made the difficult decision to drop out of college. I couldn't fight a battle on so many fronts, not while living under Kent's roof. I needed to focus on survival first, education second. I picked up more shifts at the restaurant and applied for a second job at an all-night convenience store. For the next few months, I existed in a state of hypervigilance, keeping my remaining possessions locked in my car trunk during the day. I saved every penny, buying nothing beyond absolute necessities. I researched affordable apartments, but discovered that even the cheapest studio required first and last month's rent plus a security deposit, a sum that would take me months to accumulate. Meanwhile, Kent escalated his demands. After I refused once again to sign over my insurance money, he presented me with a formal rental agreement, $850 monthly for my bedroom, not including utilities and food surcharges. It was more than twice what I had been paying him and clearly designed to be impossible on my current income. "If you can't afford it," he said with a cold smile, "there are plenty of shelters for people in your situation." I knew then that I needed to leave, even without a proper place to go. The house that had once been filled with love had become a psychological war zone, and I was losing ground daily. I began preparing for my escape, knowing it would mean leaving behind the last physical connections to my parents and the life we had shared. My 21st birthday marked the final breaking point. I had been working a double shift and came home to find my bedroom door removed from its hinges. Kent stood in the hallway with Ryan and Melissa, all three watching for my reaction. "Property improvement," Kent explained with a smirk. "Doors are a privilege, not a right." When I asked what he meant, he handed me a typed list of house rules for adult dependents. The document outlined that I would now be required to pay $1,000 monthly rent, a further increase. Perform all household cleaning and maintenance. Prepare dinner for the family 5 nights weekly. Surrender my car keys when not at work to reduce unnecessary fuel consumption. Submit weekly schedules for approval with no overnight absences permitted. Allow weekly room inspections for contraband, which included my mother's photographs. The rules concluded with a statement that failure to comply would result in immediate eviction. It was signed by Kent, Ryan, and Melissa, like some twisted family constitution. I read it twice, my hands shaking. Then I looked up at their expectant faces and realized they were enjoying this. They wanted me to break down, to beg, to surrender what little dignity I had left. Instead, I walked past them to my doorless room, pulled my emergency backpack from under the bed, and began packing essentials. Kent leaned against the wall, watching. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, amusement evident in his voice. "Choosing option B," I replied, not looking up. "Immediate eviction." His amusement faltered. "Don't be dramatic, Haley." "Where will you go?" I didn't answer. I continued packing methodically: clothes, toiletries, my mother's wedding ring that I'd kept hidden in a hollowed-out book, the few photographs I'd managed to save. Ryan and Melissa exchanged uncertain glances as I worked, their entertainment turning to confusion. Within 20 minutes, I had loaded my car with everything I could fit. As I walked out the front door, Kent called after me. "You'll be back within a week, begging for your room. And the terms will be different then." I didn't look back. I got into my Honda, started the engine, and drove away from the only home I'd ever known. That first night, I parked in a 24-hour Walmart lot, reasoning that the security cameras and constant activity would provide some safety. I reclined my seat as far as it would go, covered myself with a blanket, and tried to sleep as shoppers came and went around me. Every car door closing, every burst of laughter from late-night customers jolted me awake. By morning, I had maybe 2 hours of fitful sleep and a crick in my neck that would become a constant companion. I quickly established a routine out of necessity. I would wake up around 6 a.m. when the parking lot began to fill with morning shoppers. I kept a membership at a cheap gym primarily for shower access, so I'd head there to clean up and change into work clothes. I stored professional-looking outfits in the back seat, carefully folded to avoid wrinkles that would give away my living situation. By 8 a.m., I'd be at a local coffee shop, nursing the cheapest drink on the menu while using their Wi-Fi to search for affordable housing and fill out job applications. Most days, I'd head to my diner shift at 11 a.m., work until 7 p.m., then drive directly to the convenience store for the overnight shift from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. On days when I didn't have the diner shift, I'd nap in my car in a different parking lot, always setting an alarm to ensure I moved before security might notice. The physical toll was immediate and severe. Within 2 weeks, I'd lost 10 pounds from a combination of stress and irregular meals. I ate whatever was cheapest or occasionally marked down at the end of my diner shift. The convenience store had a policy against employees eating the food, even items set to be thrown out, so those shifts were spent in growing hunger. Sleep deprivation became my constant state. I never got more than 4 consecutive hours, and what sleep I did get was light and vigilant. Every sound, a car door, footsteps, voices nearby, would jerk me awake with a racing heart. I learned to differentiate between the sounds of teenagers hanging out, generally harmless, couples arguing, potentially problematic, and the distinctive approach of security or police vehicles. Time to move, immediately. Maintaining appearances became a second job. I kept baby wipes, dry shampoo, and a small mirror in my glove compartment for quick touch-ups. I rotated my work clothes carefully, hand-washing items in gym bathroom sinks when necessary. I developed elaborate explanations for why coworkers couldn't drop me off or pick me up at home. "My roommate has severe social anxiety," I'd say with an apologetic smile. Or, "I'm actually staying with my boyfriend this week," for variety. My coworkers at both jobs largely accepted these excuses, too busy with their own struggles to question mine too deeply. But there were close calls. Once, a well-meaning diner regular offered me a ride when she saw me waiting at the bus stop after my shift. I declined, claiming I was meeting someone, then had to wait an extra 30 minutes to make sure she was gone before walking to my car. The weather became an enemy I hadn't fully anticipated. Spring rainstorms turned my car into a humid box that never fully dried out. My clothes developed a perpetual dampness and mildew began to form along the window seals. As summer approached, the opposite problem emerged. My car became an oven during daylight hours, making daytime sleep nearly impossible. I developed systems for everything. Library bathrooms were cleaner than gas stations. Hospital waiting areas could provide a couple hours of indoor rest if I looked worried enough about a fictional relative. Church parking lots were safe on weeknights, but monitored on Sundays. Truck stops had the best shower facilities, but required careful timing to avoid unwanted attention. Despite my precautions, there were terrifying moments. One night, a group of drunk men noticed me trying to settle down in my car and began rocking it, laughing as they shouted obscenities. I drove away with my heart pounding, then spent the night in a brightly lit fast food restaurant parking lot, too afraid to sleep. Another time, I woke to a police officer tapping on my window at 4 a.m. City ordinance prohibited sleeping in vehicles, he informed me. I apologized profusely, claiming I had worked a double shift and pulled over because I was too tired to drive safely. He let me go with a warning, but the encounter left me shaking for hours afterward. The constant movement and vigilance took their toll mentally as well. I developed a persistent cough from lack of rest and proper nutrition. My hands began to shake slightly, first only when I was particularly tired, then almost constantly. I caught every cold that passed through either workplace, each lasting longer than it should have due to my weakened immune system. About 6 months into this existence, my car's transmission began making ominous sounds. I had managed to save almost $2,000 toward an apartment deposit, but the cheapest repair estimate was $1,200. Without my car, I would lose both jobs and what passed for shelter. With no choice, I spent over half my savings on the repair. 2 months later, disaster struck again. I returned from my diner shift to find my parking spot empty. My car had been towed from the shopping center where I'd left it. The impound fee was $275, plus $50 for each day it remained in the lot. The attendant smirked as he informed me that they'd need to see proof of address and current registration before releasing the vehicle. I borrowed money from a reluctant coworker, claiming a family emergency, and managed to retrieve my car the next day after spending a sleepless night in a 24-hour laundromat. The experience depleted my savings to less than $400, back to square one after over 8 months of this life. That night was perhaps my lowest point. It was mid-December, with temperatures dropping below freezing. I parked in the far corner of an industrial lot, trying to stay out of sight. Snow began falling around midnight, beautiful but merciless in its cold. My car's heater could only run for short periods before draining the battery, so I huddled under every piece of clothing and blanket I owned, shivering violently. For the first time, I considered calling Kent. Maybe surrendering to his rules would be better than freezing to death in a parking lot. My fingers hovered over his contact information, still saved in my phone. I imagined the satisfaction on his face, the increased demands he would make, the complete surrender of whatever independence I had managed to maintain. Instead, I curled tighter into my nest of blankets and wept, for my parents, for the life I'd lost, for the future that seemed to be slipping further away with each passing day. I must have eventually fallen asleep because I woke to a tapping on my window and a beam of light shining into my car. The beam of light belonged to Doug, a regular customer at the diner where I worked. Middle-aged with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, he often sat in my section, leaving generous tips and making friendly conversation. I had noticed him watching me with concern the previous day when I'd nearly dozed off while refilling his coffee. I rolled down my window slightly, heart racing. "Can I help you?" "Haley, right?" he said, lowering his flashlight. "I recognized your car. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I replied automatically. "Just resting before my next shift." He glanced at the pile of blankets, the clothes hanging from hooks above the windows, the small container of toiletries visible on the passenger seat. His expression shifted from concern to understanding. "How long have you been living in your car?" he asked quietly. I considered lying, but was simply too exhausted. "About 8 months." He nodded, as if confirming something he'd suspected. "I'd like to talk to you." "Not here. There's a Denny's about a mile up the road. Would you meet me there?" My treat, no strings attached. Every warning bell from months of vulnerable living rang in my head. But something about his manner seemed genuinely concerned rather than threatening. Plus, we would be in a public place, and I was desperately hungry. "I'll follow you there," I agreed cautiously. 20 minutes later, seated in a booth with a cup of hot coffee warming my hands, I watched Doug warily as he studied me across the table. "My name is Douglas Bennett," he said finally. "And I think I'm your uncle." I nearly spilled my coffee. "What?" "Your mother was Linda Bennett before she married your father, right?" When I nodded, he continued, "She was my sister." I stared at him in disbelief. Mom had rarely spoken about her family, saying only that they had different values and had drifted apart before I was born. I had never met any of her relatives and had assumed they were either dead or disinterested. "If you're my uncle, where have you been all these years?" I demanded, suspicion overriding my initial shock. "Where were you when Mom was sick?" "When she died." Pain flickered across his face. "I deserve that. Linda and I had a falling out when she married your father." I disapproved, thought she was too young, that they were rushing things. He shook his head. "Stupid, stubborn pride." Years passed, and the rift just grew wider. I moved to California for work, built a life there. By the time I realized how foolish I'd been, it felt too late. "It was too late," I said coldly. "She's gone." "I know," he said softly. I moved back to town about 6 months ago, hoping to reconnect. When I finally worked up the courage to reach out, I learned she had passed away almost 2 years earlier. No one had notified me. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through the photos, and passed it to me. "But I recognized you immediately when I saw you at the diner." The screen showed a much younger Doug with his arm around a woman who was unmistakably my mother, same eyes, same smile. They were standing in front of a lake, squinting into the sun, both making the peace sign that Mom always did in photos. I had never seen this picture before, but there was no denying its authenticity. "How do I know you're not just some creep who found an old photo?" I asked, though my voice lacked conviction. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. "Your mother sent me this when you were born. It's the only communication we had in 20 years. It was a birth announcement. My birth announcement. My full name, birth weight, and a tiny footprint. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as Mom's, 'You're an uncle, Doug.' I wish things were different. Linda." Something broke inside me then. After months of stoicism, of doing whatever it took to survive, of never letting anyone see weakness, I began to sob uncontrollably in that Denny's booth at 2 a.m. All the grief, exhaustion, and fear poured out in great, heaving gasps. Doug moved to my side of the booth, not touching me but offering silent support as I fell apart. When the waitress approached with concerned looks, he quietly asked for more coffee and a full breakfast order for both of us. Eventually, my sobs subsided into hiccups, then into exhausted silence. Doug passed me napkins to dry my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered, embarrassed by my breakdown. "Don't be," he replied. From the looks of things, that was long overdue. Over the next hour, as I devoured the first hot meal I'd had in days, Doug gently asked about my situation. At first, I gave vague answers, but something about his patient listening broke down my remaining defenses. I told him everything, about Kent and my step-siblings, about Mom's illness and death, about the college fund that disappeared, about the escalating abuse that drove me to choose homelessness over continued mistreatment. Doug listened without interrupting, his expression darkening as my story unfolded. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I failed your mother," he finally said. "And by extension, I failed you. I can't change the past, but I want to help now, Haley. I have a guest house on my property. It's small, but it's private and comfortable. It's yours if you want it, no strings attached." My survival instincts flared with suspicion. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "You're my niece," he said simply. "You're family. And while I'm 20 years too late, I'd like the chance to be family to you now." "I don't need charity," I insisted, pride rising despite my desperate circumstances. "It's not charity. It's..." He paused, searching for words. "It's atonement, maybe. Or just basic human decency. Look, I'm not asking you to trust me completely right away. Keep your jobs, maintain your independence. The guest house has its own entrance and kitchen. You'd have privacy and security while you figure out your next steps." I hesitated, years of self-reliance warring with my desperate need for safe shelter. "I don't know." Doug seemed to sense my internal struggle. "When I was 22, he said slowly, I lost my job and apartment in the same week. I lived in my car for 3 months during a Chicago winter. I know what you're going through. The constant vigilance, never feeling safe enough to truly rest, the shame that isn't deserved but feels inescapable. I looked up surprised. You were homeless? He nodded. A stranger helped me when I had nothing. Gave me a place to stay, no questions asked. That kindness changed the trajectory of my life. I swore I'd pay it forward someday. He met my eyes. I'm not trying to be your savior, Haley. I'm just offering you a door. It's up to you whether you walk through it. I stared into my empty coffee cup, weighing my options. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was too good to be true, that trusting a virtual stranger was dangerous. But another part, the part that recognized my mother's smile in his photos, that heard the genuine regret in his voice, whispered that this might be the lifeline I desperately needed. 1 week, I said finally. I'll try it for 1 week. Doug nodded, respecting my caution. 1 week. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, you can leave, no questions asked. As we left the restaurant, snow was falling again. Doug handed me a business card with his address. Follow me home? Or would you rather get your things first? I glanced at my car, containing everything I owned in the world. I have my things. He nodded in understanding, and I followed his taillights through the snowy streets, toward an uncertain future, but, for the first time in months, a glimmer of hope. Doug's guest house turned out to be a converted garage attached to a spacious colonial home in one of the city's more affluent neighborhoods. Though small, it was immaculately finished with a kitchenette, bathroom, living area, and lofted bedroom space. After 8 months of living in my car, it felt like a palace. The fridge is stocked with basics, Doug explained, showing me around. Bathroom has fresh towels. Wi-Fi password is on the counter. The door has a deadbolt, keys yours, and I don't have a copy. That last detail, the privacy and security it represented, nearly brought me to tears again. Thank you, I managed to say, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. Get some rest, he replied simply. We can talk more when you're ready. I slept for 14 hours straight that first night, waking disoriented in an actual bed, momentarily panicking until I remembered where I was. The silence was the most startling thing. No car doors slamming, no footsteps to jerk me awake, just peaceful quiet. For the first few days, I remained cautious and distant, leaving for my shifts and returning with minimal interaction. Doug respected my space, occasionally leaving containers of home-cooked food on the small porch with notes, made too much chili, or thought you might like some of this lasagna. Gradually, I learned more about his life. Doug had built a successful commercial real estate development company in California before selling it and semi-retiring at 48. He'd moved back to our hometown hoping to reconnect with Mom, his only living relative, only to discover he was too late. I have more money than I know what to do with, he admitted one evening when I finally accepted his dinner invitation to the main house. And no one to share it with or leave it to. Finding you feels like, I don't know, a second chance somehow. Over the following weeks, a tentative trust began to form between us. I maintained my jobs, but reduced my hours at the convenience store, allowing myself actual sleep and gradually regaining my health. With Doug's encouragement, I began to consider returning to school. About a month after moving into the guest house, Doug introduced me to his friend Caroline, an attorney who specialized in estate law. I'd like you to tell Caroline about your stepfather and the college fund, Doug explained, just to explore whether there might be some legal recourse. I was hesitant. The thought of confronting Kent, even through legal channels, made my stomach knot with anxiety. But Caroline's calm professionalism put me at ease. Based on what you've told me, she said after hearing my story, there may be grounds for legal action regarding both the misappropriation of funds specifically designated for your education and potentially the life insurance proceeds, depending on how your mother's will was worded. I don't have money for legal fees, I pointed out. Caroline glanced at Doug. Let's just gather information for now. I have a colleague who specializes in financial forensics. With your permission, he could look into the paper trail. With trepidation, I agreed. The investigation process was slow but revealed more than I expected. Kent had not only depleted my college fund, but had also taken out a second mortgage on the house shortly after Mom's death, using her life insurance policy as leverage. The investment opportunity he'd claimed to pursue had never existed. The money had simply funded his lifestyle and Ryan's college tuition. "This is clear financial abuse," Caroline explained during a follow-up meeting. "And given that some of these transactions occurred while you were still a minor under his care, there's a strong case for restitution." She recommended filing a civil suit, assuring me that her firm would take it on contingency. They'd only collect fees if we won. Doug offered to cover any additional expenses. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to," he reminded me. "But sometimes facing your abusers is part of the healing process." After days of contemplation, I decided to proceed. The legal machinery moved slowly but deliberately. Kent initially ignored the court summons, seemingly believing he could dismiss the matter as he had dismissed me. When Caroline's firm escalated the case, he finally hired an attorney who proposed a lowball settlement that we promptly rejected. For months after I'd moved into Doug's guest house, we had our day in court. Seeing Kent, Ryan, and Melissa enter the courtroom sent a wave of nausea through me. They looked exactly the same, Kent with his confident stride, Ryan and Melissa flanking him like bodyguards. The only difference was the flash of surprise on their faces when they spotted me sitting between Doug and Caroline, no longer the vulnerable, isolated young woman they had tormented. As Caroline presented our case, complete with financial records, timeline of abuse, and testimony from the executor of Mom's will, Kent's expression shifted from dismissive to concerned. His attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable as evidence mounted of financial impropriety and breach of fiduciary duty. During a court recess, Kent's attorney approached Caroline with a new settlement offer, significantly higher than the first, but still less than what had been taken from me. "Tell them we want the full amount plus interest," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "And I want Mom's photo albums and jewelry box." Those weren't his to keep. The negotiation continued through the afternoon. By day's end, we had reached an agreement. Kent would pay restitution for the college fund plus interest, return my mother's personal effects, and cover our legal fees. In exchange, we would drop further claims against the estate. As the paperwork was being finalized, Kent approached our table, his attorney trailing behind him with a warning hand that Kent shrugged off. "You think you've won," he said, voice low enough that only Doug and I could hear. "But money won't change what you are, a pathetic, ungrateful." "Mr. Williams," Doug interrupted, standing to his full height, which exceeded Kent's by several inches. "I'd advise you to return to your table and allow the attorneys to complete their work. Unless you'd prefer to continue this conversation under oath on the witness stand." Kent's face flushed with anger, but he retreated without further comment. I caught a glimpse of Ryan and Melissa watching from their seats, their expressions a mix of resentment and something that might have been shame. The following weekend, Doug drove me to my former home to collect Mom's belongings as stipulated in the settlement. Kent was conspicuously absent, leaving Ryan to supervise the exchange. He watched silently as I carefully packed the photo albums, jewelry box, and a few other mementos into boxes. As I was preparing to leave, Ryan stepped forward awkwardly. "Haley, he began, then stopped, seeming unsure how to continue. I paused, waiting. "What happened to you?" he finally said, not meeting my eyes. It wasn't right. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement, the first crack in the united front they had presented for years. "No," I agreed simply. "It wasn't." I carried the boxes to Doug's waiting car, feeling lighter with each step. The money would fund my education, but these irreplaceable connections to Mom were the true victory. As we drove away, I watched my childhood home recede in the side mirror until it disappeared around a corner, no longer a place of pain, just a house growing smaller in the distance. "You did well in there," Doug said, breaking the silence. "Your mother would be proud." For the first time in years, I felt that might actually be true. In the months that followed, I maintained my independence while accepting Doug's support. I resumed classes at the community college, this time without the sabotage and exhaustion that had derailed my earlier attempts. Doug offered to pay for direct transfer to a 4-year university, but I insisted on earning my way through the community college pathway first, not out of pride this time, but because I wanted to prove to myself that I could. The money will be there when you're ready, Doug assured me. No expiration date on my offer. I kept my diner job, reducing to part-time as my course load increased. The familiar routine and connections with regular customers provided stability as I rebuilt my life. Sometimes, I would catch Doug sitting in my section, watching with quiet pride as I navigated my new normal. That night, for the first time since Mom died, I slept without fear, without hypervigilance, without the crushing weight of survival consuming every thought. My path forward remained uncertain in many ways, but for the first time in years, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than threat. 1 year after moving into Doug's guest house, I'm sitting in my own apartment, a small but bright one-bedroom near campus that I can afford thanks to the settlement and my continued part-time work at the diner. My walls are decorated with photos of Mom and Dad, alongside new memories with Doug and friends I've made at nursing school. Yes, nursing school. After completing my prerequisites with a 4.0 GPA, I was accepted into the BSN program at the state university. The irony isn't lost on me. Mom always said I'd make a good doctor, but nursing feels right. Something about being the person who provides comfort during the worst moments of someone's life resonates with my own journey. The transformation from homeless waitress to nursing student hasn't been without challenges. Trauma doesn't disappear with improved circumstances. It lingers in unexpected moments of panic, in nightmares that still occasionally jolt me awake, in the reflexive flinch when someone raises their voice near me. Therapy has been essential to my healing process. Initially, I resisted when Doug suggested it, viewing it as an admission of weakness. But my therapist, Dr. Martinez, has helped me understand that seeking help is actually a form of strength, the courage to face what happened rather than simply trying to outrun it. Resilience isn't about never breaking, she told me during an early session. It's about how you piece yourself back together afterward. Those pieces have included reconnecting with Sarah, my best friend from high school who had drifted away during Mom's illness. When she reached out via social media, I was hesitant to respond, still raw from the isolation of those years. But our reunion over coffee turned into a 6-hour conversation, tears and laughter bridging the gap that circumstances had created. I should have tried harder to stay connected, she admitted, wiping away tears. I just didn't understand what was happening, and then you seemed to disappear completely. I did disappear, I replied, sharing parts of my story I'd never thought I'd tell anyone. But I'm finding my way back now. Healing has also meant giving back. Once a week, I volunteer at a youth shelter, helping teens who have aged out of foster care or left unsafe homes. I teach basic financial literacy, help with college applications, or sometimes just listen, offering the kind of support I desperately needed during my own crisis. During one volunteer session, I encountered Melissa in the shelter hallway. She had apparently started volunteering there a month earlier. Our eyes met with mutual shock, both of us freezing momentarily. "Hi," she said finally, her confidence from our step-sibling days notably absent. "Hi," I echoed, unsure how to navigate this unexpected collision of past and present. "I'm helping with the GED prep program," she explained awkwardly. Dad and Ryan moved to Arizona last year. I stayed to finish college. I nodded, not trusting myself to respond neutrally to mentions of Kent. "Haley, She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "I've wanted to apologize for a long time. What I did, it was cruel. Inexcusable." The apology caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to hold on to the righteous anger that had fueled my survival. But another part recognized the courage it took for her to say those words, to face her own complicity. "Thank you for saying that," I replied carefully. "I'm still processing a lot of what happened." She nodded, accepting the limited response. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better than I was." We didn't become friends after that encounter, but the interaction helped release some of the bitterness I'd been carrying. Kent and Ryan remained unchanged as far as I knew, but Melissa's attempt at amends suggested that people could evolve beyond their worst behaviors, a hopeful thought for someone working toward a healing profession. My relationship with Doug has deepened into something I never expected to have again: family. We have dinner together at least once a week, sharing stories and gradually filling in the gaps in our understanding of each other's lives. He's taught me to play chess, he usually wins, and how to change my own oil, a skill I wish I'd had during my car living days. In turn, I've introduced him to my favorite books and the joys of binge-watching medical dramas just to critique the inaccuracies. For my 22nd birthday, the first I'd celebrated properly since before Mom died, Doug arranged a small gathering at his house. Just a few people: Sarah and her boyfriend, 2 nursing school classmates, Dr. Martinez, and Caroline the attorney who had become a friend. They sang happy birthday as I blew out candles on a homemade cake, and for a moment, the simple joy of it nearly overwhelmed me. Later that evening, Doug presented me with a small wooden box. Inside was a delicate silver locket that I recognized immediately. "Mom's necklace," I whispered, lifting it carefully. "How did you?" "I found it listed on an online auction site," he explained. "Kent must have sold it despite the settlement agreement. I thought you should have it back." Inside the locket was a tiny photo of Mom and Dad on their wedding day, smiling with the limitless hope of new beginnings. I fastened it around my neck, the familiar weight against my collarbone feeling like a piece of myself returning. That night, I performed a small ritual I'd started on the anniversary of Mom's death. I wrote her a letter, updating her on my life, sharing my hopes and fears, telling her how much I still missed her guidance. Then I burned it, watching the ashes float away on the night breeze from my apartment balcony, imagining the words somehow reaching her. This year's letter included something new: forgiveness. Not for Kent or for what had been done to me, but for myself. Forgiveness for the moments of weakness, for the times I'd nearly given up, for the guilt I'd carried about not somehow preventing Mom's illness or death. For the first time, I fully accepted that survival isn't always pretty or perfect. Sometimes it's just continuing to exist until existence becomes living again. Looking toward the future, my path feels clearer than it has in years. I'll graduate with my nursing degree in 2 years, hopefully specializing in oncology care, a way to honor Mom while helping others through their darkest moments. Doug has established a foundation to assist homeless youth with education and housing, and I serve on its advisory board, turning my experience into something constructive. I still carry scars from those months in my car and the years of abuse that preceded them. I probably always will. But I've learned that scars are evidence not just of wounding but of healing, proof that we can endure what once seemed unsurvivable. If you're watching this and struggling through your own dark chapter, please know that your story isn't over. The human spirit has an astonishing capacity for resilience, for finding light in the most profound darkness. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places: an estranged uncle, a diner regular, a former stepsister seeking redemption. The key is remaining open to possibility, even when past experience screams at you to close every door. Have you ever experienced an unexpected act of kindness that changed your life? Or have you been the one to offer help when someone needed it most? Drop a comment below sharing your story. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this resonated with you, please subscribe and share with someone who might need this message of hope. And remember that, even in your darkest moments, you are never as alone as you feel. Thank you for being part of my healing journey, and until next time, be kind to yourselves and each other.